Is this as polarizing a QB class, these 6, as you can remember?
I think so, because there's stuff that you can – I mean, there's always going to be stuff, unless it's Andrew Luck, I guess, that you could really nitpick about the quarterbacks in one way or another. Drake May was actually the most polarizing of the quarterbacks. I think Penix is the most polarizing if you ask draft Twitter that. But if you ask the coaches who faced him, people are kind of wowed by Penix's arm talent. It wasn't a dink and dunk offense. We've talked about this a lot. He has battled through real adversity and come through the other side. Took a team that was 4-8 and was largely the same roster, and they went 25-3. I'm a believer in Penix. Drake May, the part that gives some people pause, he can throw the heck out of it. He's got really good size. He's athletic. But unlike most of the other guys in this draft who transferred, except for him and J.J. McCarthy, he's actually played in 2 systems, though, also. He didn't transfer, but they went from a version of the air raid to what, his offense last year with Chip Lindsey. And there are guys I talk to who love his talent, but they're also like, man, when we played him, we thought he'd get really scared in the pocket. And he wasn't the same, didn't have the same feel for it. But Sam Howell, he's bigger and throws it better. But so there's, and then there's J.J. McCarthy, who didn't put up big stats, and they didn't ask him to throw it all over the place. But he won a ton of games. He can throw really well on the run, and he's a dynamic athlete. And there is a lot of stuff people really like. And when they meet with him, they get wowed by him, because I think Jim Harbaugh trained him to do stuff that probably, honestly, you were trained to do as an NFL guy. A couple of decades ago, that NFL coaches really like. JJ had that with Jim Harbaugh.
If you were looking for a quarterback, and I don't know what the Seahawks are. They seem not to be, and that seems to be why they traded for Sam Howell and kind of have gone now in a different direction. But the quarterbacks are just so fascinating, especially in this group. Is there one trait that you look at and say either this is something you have to have, or this is the one trait that scares me? We've seen so many quarterbacks bust, and that rate is so challenging over the years. Is there any thread that you've ever kind of picked up on?
I mean, I think it's a couple of things. It's like, how savvy are they in terms of how well they see it and process information? I think that's a big thing. I mean, I was around Joe Burrow a lot his last year at LSU, and was really blown away by, he was like a coach on the field and how he commanded it and everything else. To me, that's a huge thing. Most of these guys have enough arm to be very good if they're in the right system. Whether they, you don't need Joe Milton's arm to be a really successful NFL quarterback. I think the challenge for some of the other ones, like if I had the first pick in the draft, it'd be hard not to roll the dice on Caleb. But, there's definitely stuff that would give you pause about him, though. and that would make me a little skeptical. If you ask me, if I had the second pick of the draft and I needed a quarterback and Caleb is not there, I'd have a hard time saying no to Michael Penix, because he made so many big-time throws, and I get it. He had 3 terrific receivers, and he had a really good offensive line. But I know this about him. I know he has battled through adversity and come through the other side. I know he is, got an electric arm, and he is not afraid. I go back to something Cam Cameron had once explained to me. He was like, in the NFL, and he was like basically standing like almost cheek to cheek with me. He was like, this is open. And in college, guys are wide open. Tim Tebow could get away with a lot of stuff, because of all the spacing he had. Whereas in the NFL, if you can't really fit the ball in there and don't either have great anticipation or see it or really pinpoint accuracy to go with that arm talent, I think you could be really disappointing. And we know Penix can do that. To me, there's a lot I would be sold on with Penix if I needed a quarterback bad.
Yeah, he's Bruce Feldman, Twitter at Bruce Feldman, College Football, all over The Athletic. Great podcast he does with Stuart Mandel every week. You referenced now a couple times, and I don't know if everybody has read that piece, Bruce, that you wrote, and it was awesome, on Michael Penix at Indiana and some of the struggles. You and I were in a production meeting room together. You and I have talked about this a lot. I don't know how much that story really is out there. You've said on a couple occasions now what you love is he's overcome. He's come from the deepest of depths. I mean, I believe in your article you had talked about him even like praying and crying and being on the ground like, I don't know if I can do this. Can you explain maybe anecdotally some of that to our audience?
Yeah, he 4 season-ending injuries, and for a lot of guys, especially elite guys coming out of high school, which obviously one of the three of us was that. What happens when you get adversity? What really happens to you? And what amazed me about Penix, and I went up to Seattle last year around this time, and ended up having a long conversation with him. It went in a direction I did not expect it to go. He was very candid. More so than almost any other athlete I can remember in college in a while. And the more I learned about it was him just kind of giving me a window into where he was. Not where he is, but where he was and how he came through it. And I think that takes an incredible amount of resolve and mental strength to push through it. And then not only to push through it, but not to bury it. And he was so candid about it. And then, you talk to people who are around him in Indiana, where I think for some of them, and I'm talking about the people who are not at the Washington side of it, but I think for them, I think it was like, man, this guy's really struggled with all the medical stuff, and you don't know what's going on and everything. And that program kind of was spinning its wheels after he left. And he goes to Seattle, and he just ends up, I don't want to say he reinvents himself, because I just think he just keeps growing and maturing and evolving. And some of that other stuff, like, it's interesting when you get people to really open up about this. So E.J. Manuel, former first-round quarterback from Florida State, very bright man, now is working in TV. I asked E.J., I was like, the same question I'd asked Brock, this is for this story probably 2 months ago, was about the battling through adversity. Because if you talk to people who are in the NFL scouting space, they said the biggest reason why high-level quarterbacks in the draft don't work out is because they can't handle the adversity when it hits them. And EJ said to me, he goes, when I got up in Buffalo, I had like 4 injuries, and none of them were, I don't want to say they weren't, very serious, but he was like, you start listening to a lot of stuff, and you start doubting yourself, and all these other things happen. And EJ was never able to get his NFL career really on track after any of that. Mm-hmm. And so he was like, that is a very real thing. And most people, and I'm talking about like very few people have ever been like an NFL quarterback or been a high, first round pick or whatever. There's very few people who know what it's like to live in that world and to have the doubt. So when Sam Darnold says on Monday Night Football, it talks about seeing ghosts, Twitter and a lot of us can like roll our eyes or whatever, but like, how do you bounce back from that? It is, and it's much easier said than done. And again, I go back to Penix and just knowing a little, not everything, but knowing a little about what he's battled through. Like, I'm a believer in him. I am. I get it. He didn't have a great game against Michigan, but if somehow Texas ends up beating them on like the last play in the red zone or whatever, and his college career ends on that, what are you going to nitpick then? Then? Because he was amazing in that game. It was arguably the best performance any quarterback had played in college football that year, in a big game. Caleb hadn't done that in a big game like that. Drake May hadn't played any big games of that magnitude. So Jaden Daniels, as good as he was, I get it, his defense stunk, but it wasn't like he was in that kind of game. So I don't know. Didn't mean to steer it all the way on Penix, but
it's great. I don't think anyone here is going to have a problem with you talking about Michael Penix for a while.